Getting some audio from inside President-elect Donald Trump's hush money sentencing. The president-elect has received the sentence of an unconditional discharge in the criminal hush money case out of New York City. Let's play a little bit of that.
By pending court proceedings or ongoing sentence-related obligations. But imposing this sentence ensures that finality. Sentencing the defendant permits this court to enter judgment, to cement the defendant's status as a convicted felon while he pursues whatever appeals he intends to pursue. And it gives full effect and respect to the jury's verdict while preserving the defendant's ability to govern. The people therefore recommend that this court impose a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Counsel.
Thank you, Your Honor. I very much disagree with much of what the government just said about this case, about the legitimacy of what happened in this courtroom during the trial, and about President Trump's conduct fighting this case from before it was indicted, to while it was indicted, to the jury's verdict, and even to this day. What the government just said presupposes something that we disagree with very much, which was that this was an appropriate case to be brought. It was not. This case, without a doubt, knowing everything we know about the timing of the investigation, the fact that multiple prosecutors looked at the fact of this case, including prosecutors within the district attorney's office in New York County, and made a decision not to bring charges. As the court knows, shortly after President Trump announced his intention to run for re-election, this case was started for what amounted to a third time, which brings us ultimately to where we are today. A lot of what the government just said presupposes that this case is legally appropriate and that the charges that were brought by the people were consistent with the laws of New York. Again, we very much disagree with that, and as everybody has been noted, because it's true, we certainly intend on appealing that. And it's not, by the way, just counsel and President Trump that feels that way. There's many legal experts that share the same views that I just said, which is that legally this case should not have been brought, both based on the facts that were established at trial and also on the legal basis for which they were brought. But it's also not just the legal experts, not just counsel, and not just President Trump, but the majority of the American people also agree that this case should not have been brought. I mean, the interesting thing about the fact that there was a trial for the first time in our history, a criminal trial during an election season, is that the American voters got a chance to see and decide for themselves whether this is the kind of case that should have been brought. And they decided. And that's why in 10 days, President Trump is going to assume the office of the President of the United States. And certainly we're here for the court to sentence President Trump to an unconditional discharge. And for that, it's a very sad day. It's a sad day for President Trump and his family and friends. But it's also, in counsel's view, a sad day for this country, because this was a case, without a doubt, that was brought by a district attorney who promised that he would go after President Trump if elected, and felt like he had to go through with that promise. And so that's sad. And I hope, and I know that President Trump shares this view, that this will never happen again in this country. And so we certainly understand where we are today. We very much intend on pursuing an appeal of this verdict and what happened during this investigation. And we certainly believe that the only appropriate sentence if one's to be imposed at all, which we very much believe it shouldn't be, and that the case should be dismissed, is a sentence of an unconditional discharge. Thank you.
Thank you. Would your client like to be heard?
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. This has been a very terrible experience. I think it's been a tremendous setback for New York and the New York court system. This is a case that Alvin Bragg did not want to bring. He thought it was, from what I read and from what I hear, inappropriately handled before he got there. A gentleman from a law firm came in and acted as a district attorney, and that gentleman, from what I heard, was a criminal or almost criminal in what he did. It was very inappropriate. It was somebody involved with my political opponent. Part of the records that we're talking about, they're saying, I just noticed where he said I was falsifying business records. Well, the falsification of business records, as they say, it was calling a legal expense in the books where everybody could see them, a legal expense. In other words, that legal fees or legal expense were put down as legal expense by accountants. They weren't put down by me. They were put down by accountants. I didn't call them construction, concrete work. I didn't call them electrical work. I didn't call them anything. They called a legal fee or a legal expense, and for this, I got indicted. It's incredible, actually. Now, if you look, my attorney alluded to it, the top legal scholars and legal pundits in this country, the ones that are quoted all the time on television, that are making their views felt and highly respected people, have said, everyone, virtually everyone that I know of, I haven't seen any to the contrary, not one. And none of these people are not exactly friends of mine, to put it mildly. But they all said this is a case that should have never been brought. It's an injustice of justice. Very respected Jonathan Turley, Andy McCarthy, Judge David Rifkin, a wonderful man who just passed away, by the way, Greg Jarrett, Ellie Honig from CNN, of all places. CNN said that, Paul Ingratian, Alan Dershowitz, they all said this is not a case that should be brought. It's not, think about it, legal expenses are down as legal expenses, and I get indicted for business records. Everybody should be so accurate. It's been a political witch hunt. It was done to damage my reputation so that I'd lose the election, and obviously that didn't work. And the people of our country got to see this firsthand because they watched the case in your courtroom. They got to see this firsthand, and then they voted, and I won and got the largest number of votes by far of any Republican candidate in history, and won, as you know, all 7 swing states, won conclusively all 7 swing states, and won the popular vote by millions and millions of votes. And they've been watching your trial, so they understood it. I wasn't allowed to use the lawyer-client privilege or the reliance on counsel. I had a lawyer that made this deal, and he admitted that. And he was also a totally discredited person. We weren't allowed to use the information from the Southern District that totally discredited him. It wasn't allowed to be put in. And that was terrible, unbelievable. And this is a man who's got no standing. He's been disbarred on other matters, unrelated. And he was allowed to talk as though he were George Washington. But he's not George Washington. He shouldn't have been allowed. The Southern District did a book of approximately 28 pages where I've never seen anything like it. They excoriated him. You wouldn't let it be put into evidence. So he was able to testify as a witness, and I think it's a disgrace to the system. I was under a gag order. I'm the first president in history that was under a gag order where I couldn't talk about aspects of the case that are very important. I guess I'm still under, so probably I won't do it now. I assume I'm still under a gag order. But the fact is that I'm totally innocent. I did nothing wrong. They talked about business records, and the business records were extremely accurately counted. I had nothing to do with them. That was done by an accountant or bookkeeper who I think gave very credible testimony and was corroborated by everybody that was asked. And with all that's happening in our country today, with the city that's burning to the ground, one of our largest, most important cities burning to the ground, with wars that are uncontrollably going on, with all of the problems of inflation and attacks on countries and all of the horrible things that are going on, I got indicted over calling a legal expense a legal expense. It was called a legal expense. I just want to say I think it's an embarrassment to New York, and New York has a lot of problems, but this is a great embarrassment. I believe that this and other cases that were brought, as you know, the DOJ is very much involved in this case. It's because that's the political opponent they're talking about. The DOJ is very involved. You have a gentleman sitting right there from the DOJ who was from the DOJ's office. He was also involved with the New York State Attorney General's case. And he went from there to here. He went around and did what he had to do. He got them to move on me. But in the meantime, I won the election in a massive landslide. And the people of this country understand what's gone on. This has been a weaponization of government. They call it lawfare. Never happened to any extent like this, but never happened in our country before. And I'd just like to explain that I was treated very, very unfairly. And I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Trump.
All right, so the headline, the president-elect says he was treated very unfairly. I want to bring back Jessica Levinson for more on this. She's a CBS News legal contributor and a professor at Loyola Law School. Jessica, I thought the most interesting of all the things that the president rambled on about with regards to his grievances, which are not new. We've heard Donald Trump express grievance at many, many things over the course of the last 8 years or so. But I thought what was interesting is he ran through a list of legal scholars who agreed with him that this was politically motivated. And I know that that doesn't hold any precedence in a court of law, but it is interesting that there are people, some of them very, very respected criminal legal minds, who agreed with the president that this trial, this case should have never been brought. What's your reaction to what he said on that audio?
So my reaction, one, is that we should be careful about making sure that all of those legal scholars really said this case should not have been brought. What I certainly have heard is that this is not a typical case that you would bring. That doesn't mean it's inappropriate. It means what's not typical about this. Typically speaking, the falsification of business records is a misdemeanor. Typically speaking, you don't kick it up to a felony. They did in this case. Why? Based on what, frankly, is a somewhat novel theory that the falsification of business records was committed in order to commit or conceal another crime. The jury was not asked to agree on what that other crime was. It might have been tax fraud. It might have been campaign finance violations. The jury had to come to a unanimous verdict, but not as to which other crime was being committed or concealed by virtue of the falsification of business records. So all of which is to say, is this the typical bread and butter case? Certainly falsification of business records cases are brought all of the time. Now, this particular set of facts and this particular theory is not brought all the time, is rare. That doesn't mean that it's inappropriate. It means it's not what we typically see. Is there something to the idea that people would not have been looking at this if we weren't talking about the former president of the United States? I think that is fair. I also think it is fair, and we talked about this with respect to people on the other side of the political aisle, to say once you look, even if you wouldn't have looked otherwise, there's no obligation to look away if you see wrongdoing.
And yet the president-elect has changed what he said about that payment to Stormy Daniels many, many times. If you recall, Jessica, originally he said he didn't know anything about it, that reporters should check with Michael Cohen. Then he ultimately admitted that he authorized that payment to Stormy Daniels. But here in this audio tape we just heard, he was talking about it in almost a different way, like that it wasn't a payment to a former porn star.
Right. He was saying this is a legal payment. It was logged as a legal payment. I don't know how else to say this other than obviously this is a different characterization than the one that we've previously heard. And we should be clear that the jury has spoken and found that there was the falsification of business records. The jury unanimously found that he was guilty on 34 felony counts. You do not find guilt on 34 felony counts if members of the jury think this was a legal payment for legal services.
All right, Jessica Levinson, always great to have your brilliant analysis, my friend. Thank you very much. Have a wonderful weekend.